Imagine for just a second that you are 17 years old.
Okay.
It's 1966. And you're sitting in a high school classroom in New York City. Now, most of us at that age are worried about, who we're taking to prom. Or maybe just trying to pass a geometry test.
Yeah, or just surviving the cafeteria social hierarchy.
Exactly. Just surviving. But you are busy engineering an actual political machine. You are literally negotiating with adult community leaders.
Wow.
You're laying the groundwork for organizations that are going to eventually rewrite the educational policy for an entire demographic in the United States.
That's wild.
Right. You aren't just floating in the current. You are actively deciding which way the river is going to flow.
It is a staggering level of agency for a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And, it forces us to immediately question all our assumptions about power.
How so?
Well, we usually think of institutional power as this massive, immovable object, like a fortress.
Yeah, totally.
You either stand outside the walls and shout at it, or you just get crushed by it. But the individual we are looking at today understood from a very early age that institutions aren't solid stone.
They're systems.
Exactly. They are systems. And if you understand the mechanics of a system, you can redirect its energy.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually make it flow in a completely different direction.
And that concept, redirecting energy, navigating the current, that is the beating heart of what we are doing today. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in a truly extraordinary document.
It really is.
It was published in June 2026, and it's titled Omnibus Poetry, Roman numeral 70 Flow. The author is Manuel del Valle y Colón.
And we should clarify something right away.
Oh, definitely. If you hear the word flow and immediately picture like an overpriced yoga retreat,
Right.
or some corporate wellness seminar where they tell you to just breathe through your inbox, erase that from your mind right now. We are going way past the buzzword today.
Far past it. The modern commercialized version of flow is almost entirely passive. It's about finding this frictionless state, removing obstacles so you don't have to struggle.
Yeah, making things easy.
Right. But the document we have sitting in front of us, which is this incredibly rich hybrid of poetry, biographical history, and tributes, presents flow as a gritty, high-stakes survival mechanism.
Yes.
Manuel del Valle Colón is presenting flow as a tool for dismantling injustice. It's a framework for processing profound trauma.
And the ultimate lens through which we can actually connect with other human beings.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to figure out how one human being can hold such an intense duality. Because on one side of the ledger, you have a relentless, combative, Ivy League-educated trial attorney and judge.
A literal fighter.
Right. A man who spent his career dissecting civil rights violations, arguing in courtrooms, facing down massive bureaucracies. And then on the other side, simultaneously, you have a poet. A deeply sensitive, vulnerable decipherer of the human soul who writes about mysticism and broken hearts and, the shadows in a photograph. How do those two people exist in the same body?
Well, they exist together because, for him, they aren't actually contradictory.
Really?
Yeah. The law and the poetry are just two different manifestations of the exact same underlying philosophy. They're both attempts to understand and direct the flow of human energy.
That makes a lot of sense.
But to really grasp how he does this in his writing, we can't just jump straight into the abstract verse. We have to look at the very real physical current of his life. We have to look at the environments that forged him.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we want to understand the poetry, we have to look at the foundation. So we're going back to New York City, October 1948.
Setting the scene.
He's born the eldest son of parents who migrated from Puerto Rico. His father from Hatillo, his mother from Mocha, and they're living in East Harlem.
Right.
He grows up in the public housing projects. First, the Carver houses, and then the Douglas projects in West Harlem.
Yeah, West 102nd Street and Amsterdam Avenue. And we really need to pause here and establish what that environment actually meant in the 1950s and 60s.
Because it wasn't just an apartment building.
No, not at all. Public housing in New York during that era was a grand, complex social experiment. It was incredibly dense. It was loud.
A total pressure cooker.
Exactly. A pressure cooker of working-class families, immigrants, and migrants trying to secure a foothold in this rapidly changing economy. You had thousands of people stacked in brutalist architecture.
Surrounded by the overwhelming sensory input of the city.
Yeah. So to survive in that environment, you had to learn how to read the room, on a massive scale. You had to learn how to read the street, read the building, read the shifting dynamics of the entire neighborhood.
And he clearly learned to read those dynamics brilliantly because his educational trajectory is, I mean, it's nothing short of a vertical climb up a sheer cliff face.
It really is.
He goes through the local public schools. And then in 1962, he gets into Brooklyn Technical High School. Now, for any of you listening who aren't familiar with the New York City public school system, Brooklyn Tech isn't just a high school.
It's an institution.
It is. It's one of the specialized exam-in schools. You don't just happen to go there. You have to test into it against the absolute smartest kids in the entire city.
It's an absolute crucible of intellect.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is looking at the high school yearbook excerpts that are included in this volume.
Oh, the yearbook quotes are amazing.
Right, you get a snapshot of how his peers viewed him back in 1966. And they aren't just calling him a smart guy. They are recognizing a very specific type of strategic gravity in him.
Yes.
They call him an amateur historian. They call him the king of quotes. One classmate literally refers to him as the power behind the throne.
Which is such a telling phrase for a teenager.
It really is.
They don't call him the king. They call him the power behind it. It implies someone who understands how the levers of power actually operate, someone who's moving the pieces on the board.
Exactly.
You read these yearbook messages and they say things like, may you be involved in a historical cataclysmic occurrence. Another just says, lots of luck, Congressman.
Yeah.
And my personal favorite, from a rebel to a rebel, I mean, he was managing the fencing team, debating, and simultaneously getting elected as the Issues and Actions chairman of the Aspira Clubs Federation.
While still doing high school homework.
Right. He's networking with the founders of major Puerto Rican advocacy groups before he even graduates.
And this is exactly what I mean about understanding institutional mechanics. He's treating his high school experience not as a holding pen until adulthood, but as a laboratory for organizing.
A laboratory, yeah.
And this sets the stage for what happens next, which is where the story shifts from impressive to, frankly, astonishing.
Yeah.
He gets selected for a postgraduate year at the Yale Transitional Year Program. And then he enters Wesleyan University as a freshman in the fall of 1967.
And here's where I really need you to break down the mechanics for me.
Sure.
Because the biography notes that as a freshman, he decides Wesleyan needs a Latino community. So he puts together a proposal, secures faculty support, and helps the university get a major grant from the Ford Foundation to focus on Latinos in higher education.
Yeah.
How does that actually happen? You don't just walk into the dean's office at 18 and ask for Ford Foundation money.
No, you certainly don't. And this is the crux of how Manuel operates. He identifies a void. In this case, the lack of institutional support for Latino students at an elite liberal arts college.
Right.
Now, most students would just complain about the void, or maybe start a very small, informal study group. Manuel looks at the structural architecture of the university. He understands that universities basically respond to two things: academic prestige and external funding.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, he doesn't just demand inclusion. He crafts an academic and social proposal that perfectly aligns with the philanthropic goals of the Ford Foundation.
Which at the time was heavily investing in civil rights.
Exactly. Civil rights and educational equity initiatives. So he creates a bridge between Wesleyan's desire for prestige and Ford's desire for impact. He literally makes it structurally beneficial for the institution to do what he wants them to do.
He weaponizes the bureaucracy to serve a righteous cause. That is just brilliant.
It is. And the result is tangible. He spends his summer working with administrators to birth the Eugenio Maria de Hostos Wesleyan Club, which was the very first student Latino organization on that campus.
Wow.
Because of him, the university actively recruits Puerto Rican males from New York, accepting a record number for the class of 1973.
And then, as if to prove the methodology wasn't just a fluke, he transfers to Princeton University in the summer of 1969 and runs the exact same playbook.
The exact same one.
He founds the Latino organization there. He gets the university to approve one of the first seminars in the entire Ivy League on the history and politics of Puerto Rico. He is institutionalizing his presence wherever he goes.
But his crowning achievement in this era is his senior thesis. And this is where the academic world and the real world just violently collide.
Yes. Tell us about the thesis.
He writes his thesis about Puerto Rican students and public education. He interns for Senator Jacob Javits. A chapter of his thesis actually gets incorporated into a memorandum for a United States Commission on Civil Rights hearing.
Which is huge on its own.
Right. But then, and this is the part that fundamentally changes the game, that memorandum is used by the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. They use it to frame their complaint in a massive landmark legal case, Aspira versus the Board of Education of the City of New York.
We really need to pause and explain the magnitude of the Aspira case, because it is totally foundational to modern educational law. The case centered on the fact that thousands of Spanish-speaking students in New York City were essentially being warehoused in classrooms. They were being taught entirely in English, a language they didn't fully understand.
Right, so they were failing.
Yeah, they were failing. The system was basically setting them up for a lifetime of disenfranchisement, and the lawsuit challenged this under the Civil Rights Act.
And the result of that lawsuit was a consent decree.
But what does that actually mean in practice? It wasn't a jury saying guilty or innocent, right?
No, exactly. A consent decree is a legally binding agreement entered into by the parties and overseen by a federal judge. Instead of risking a trial that could really go either way, the Board of Education essentially surrendered to the overwhelming evidence.
Wow.
They agreed to implement a comprehensive bilingual education program. They were legally forced to assess students' language skills and provide instruction in Spanish while they learned English. It completely rewired the architecture of the New York City school system.
And the sociological and historical framework that forced them to the table.
Built in part on Manuel's senior thesis.
His college homework literally altered the federal legal landscape. I mean, he didn't just study history, he manufactured it.
And this trajectory continues straight through Yale Law School, where he graduates in 1974 alongside people like Clarence Thomas and Lonnie Guigné.
Amazing.
He becomes a trial attorney, working on that very same Aspira case he helped frame. He becomes an administrative law judge, prosecuting civil rights violations, taking on complex racial harassment cases.
And pioneering cases involving AIDS discrimination in the early 90s, right?
Yes, when the stigma was absolutely suffocating.
You know, in preparing for this deep dive, I wrote down a metaphor in my notes. I initially wrote, it's like he was a river carving through solid rock. Because the Ivy League and the legal systems of the 60s and 70s were incredibly rigid, exclusionary structure.
They were fortresses.
Right. But hearing you explain his mechanism, that metaphor feels too simple. A river just erodes rock through brute force over 1,000,000 years. Manuel didn't have 1,000,000 years.
No, he didn't.
It's more like he was water finding the microscopic structural fissures in a concrete dam. The procedural rules, the funding mechanisms, the legal precedents. He slipped into those cracks, expanded, and fundamentally altered the structure from the inside out.
That is the system. And we see the ultimate proof of that systemic alteration in the legacy he left for others.
Oh, the tributes in the source material.
Yes. Look at the tribute from Dr. Daniel Ibarrondo. He's now an associate dean. Dr. Ibarrondo writes about growing up in Harlem with parents who only had a second-grade education.
Right.
He says the sixth-grade teacher taught him to question everything, but he didn't have the tools to find the answers. He didn't understand why his neighborhood was impoverished or the systemic roots of colonialism.
Until he meets Manuel.
Exactly. Manuel is his professor at Fordham University at the time. Dr. Ibarrondo explicitly says that Manuel taught him how to conceptualize and articulate his knowledge about law and history. Manuel did just give him the answers. He gave him the blueprint.
He showed him how to develop further questions and how to prepare himself as a professional.
He was passing on the methodology of finding those fissures. And we see this replicated at the very highest levels of the American judiciary.
You're talking about the Supreme Court connection.
Yes. There is a photograph in the text of a book inscription from Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Right.
Justice Thomas had actually invited Manuel to attend her investiture.
Wow.
And in her book, she writes, "Manuel, you were my first role model, someone with a passion for fighting for change. Thank you for all you have done for so many and for what you continue to do."
When a sitting justice of the United States Supreme Court identifies you as her first role model for driving change, your impact on the system is permanent. It's indelible.
Absolutely.
It's an incredible legacy. But it brings me to a massive contradiction, and it's really the pivot point for everything we are going to discuss today.
Okay, what is it?
Think about the psychological armor required to be that guy, to be the trial attorney, to cross-examine hostile witnesses, to fight entrenched bureaucracies.
Takes a lot.
To navigate the racial politics of the Ivy League in 1969, you have to be tough. You have to be guarded, combative, and relentlessly analytical. But then he writes poetry.
Yeah.
Poetry requires the exact opposite. It requires profound vulnerability. It requires taking the armor off and exposing your softest, most confusing emotions to the world.
Hmm.
So how does a man whose entire career is built on logical, combative argument suddenly pivot to writing verse about the soul? Is he living a double life?
I don't think it's a double life at all. What the poetry reveals is that the vulnerability and the combativeness are feeding from the exact same source.
Ooh.
Yes.
Yeah.
He doesn't compartmentalize the hard realities of his life from his artistic expression. He actually uses the poetry to synthesize the world he's fighting in. The flow he writes about isn't an escape from the grit of his reality. It is the method by which he digests it.
Okay, I see.
And to see how this works, we really have to look at how he views the very environment that shaped him, the concrete jungle of the city.
Right. Because when you and I usually think of finding flow, we think of escaping the city. We think of driving out to the woods, sitting by a stream, getting away from the noise and the concrete.
The Zen retreat idea.
Yeah. The city is the anti-flow. It's traffic, it's gridlock, it's rigid angles. But Manuel completely rejects that premise. In his poetry, he finds the deepest current of flow right in the middle of the New York City Housing Authority buildings.
Let's look closely at his poem titled, There is a Hard Flow. He doesn't romanticize the projects into something soft or pastoral. He fully acknowledges their brutalist nature.
He writes specifically about the steel-clad doors.
Yes. He describes the heavy metallic banging sound they make when they slam shut, cutting off the external world. He is really leaning into the industrial weight of the environment.
He talks about the spatial hierarchy of the building, too. He notes the premium placed on a first-floor apartment.
Which is such a great detail.
It is. And if you think about it practically, it makes perfect sense. In a massive high-rise, the elevators are constantly breaking down. If you live on the 14th floor, an elevator outage completely trapped you.
Right.
But if you're on the first floor, you have immediate access to the street. You bypass the mechanical failures of the building. You have a direct line of sight through the windows to the elementary school across the street, to the patches of grass with those ubiquitous keep off the grass signs. You're grounded.
But he doesn't just look out the window.
Yeah.
He looks down into the basement. And this is where the imagery gets incredibly powerful.
The boiler room.
Exactly. He focuses on the massive boiler system that heats the entire complex. High-rise public housing relies on these enormous industrial steam boilers. He describes the huge iron doors in the basement holding back a red-orange fire. In Manuel's poetic vision, the building is not a sterile grid of concrete and steel. It's a living, breathing organism. That terrifying, roaring boiler room is the beating heart of the structure. The heat surging up to the pipes is the thermal energy circulating through the concrete veins of the building.
It's a complete paradigm shift. He's animating the inanimate. And if the boiler is the heart, the people are the lifeblood.
Yeah.
He writes about the unseen dreams pulsing through those apartments, the old men and women telling stories of the past, but more importantly, the adolescents and the children.
He describes them watching the city being constructed around them and learning a really vital lesson. He writes that they are undaunted by the materials needed to build them, since they have learned that materials abound. All one need is gather them, design, and build.
That line is the thesis statement of his urban philosophy. He's telling us that the rigid materials of the city, the concrete, the steel, the bureaucracy, they aren't obstacles. They're just raw materials.
It's the exact same philosophy he applied to the Ivy League and the legal system. You don't fear the concrete. You gather it, you design something new with it, and you build. The flow is the human ingenuity vibrating inside those steel-clad doors.
And the most moving example of this human ingenuity, this determination to find flow in the concrete, is a poem he writes about a mother's love.
Oh, this one is beautiful.
Think about all of you listening right now who might be commuting through a city you find exhausting or oppressive. Manuel writes about a single mother in New York. She has 3 children. She doesn't have the money for subway or bus fare, but she has an immense burning desire to expose her children to high culture, to art, to the museums.
Because in New York, the great museums often had free or suggested donation entry days.
Exactly. But the geography of New York is crucial here. They live on the west side, near the Douglas Projects, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Guggenheim, they're on the east side. Between them lies the massive expanse of Central Park.
It's a long way.
So what does she do? She walks. She literally hikes her 3 kids across the entirety of Central Park, from the west side to the east side, through the weather, through the traffic, just to get them in front of great paintings.
Manuel writes, there was no stopping her when she was in her visit museum mood.
I want you to picture the sheer physical effort of that, dragging 3 kids miles across a city pavement.
And why does she do it? The poem reveals her motivation. She wants her children to value the passion that painters put into their work. She understands that witnessing creative passion is essential for intellectual survival.
That's not a luxury.
No, it's a necessity. The mother's physical walk across the city is a literal, sweating, exhausted manifestation of a flowing current. She's carving a channel of cultural inheritance for her children right through the asphalt.
And the downstream effects of that current are incredible. The poem notes what those 3 children became. Because of those walks, one child became a decipherer of complex computer code. Another became a decipherer of the soul. And the last became a decipherer of words.
The mother gave them the tools to decode the world. She couldn't give them financial wealth, so she gave them the capacity to analyze, interpret, and create. But, this forces us to address a key philosophical question about the nature of flow itself.
Right. Because going back to what we said earlier, this completely shatters the modern definition of flow.
Completely.
When we hear the word, we think of a state where everything is easy, where the work just pours out of you effortlessly, you're deeply relaxed. But a banging steel-clad door, a roaring basement boiler, a mother sweating as she force marches her kids across town, none of this is relaxed, none of it is easy.
No.
Is he suggesting that flow is something we have to violently impose on our surroundings?
He's suggesting that true flow is a state of hyper-resilience. If you define flow purely as frictionless ease, you're entirely dependent on your environment being perfect.
And it never is.
Right. If you live in the Douglas projects in the 1950s, your environment is never going to be perfect. If you wait for the babbling brook, you will wait forever. Manuel is arguing that flow is an internal rhythm.
An active choice.
Yes, it is the active choice to find the pulse in the concrete, to build a new world out of the scrap materials of the old one, to walk across the park when you can't afford the bus. Flow isn't what the world gives to you, it's what you extract from the world.
It's an aggressive, defiant kind of peace. I absolutely love that. But I don't want to give the impression that he entirely rejects nature or physical ease. Because as much as he finds flow in the harsh angles of the city, he is also deeply obsessed with the literal fluid geometry of the human body and the natural world.
Yes, his background as a competitive athlete heavily informs his poetry. He understands the body in motion, and there's a brilliant poem that perfectly contrasts the structured, artificial world with the natural world.
The swimming pool poem.
Exactly. He writes about his youth, swimming with his brother. They were top competitors for their school's swim team. They were highly trained in the mechanics of swimming. The precise breathing, the timing, the posture, the stamina.
But the poem doesn't celebrate the school pool. In fact, he calls the school pool tranquil, but you can almost hear the boredom in the word. The school pool is highly structured. It has painted lanes, exact measurements, controlled temperatures, and the constant pressure of the stopwatch.
Totally controlled.
Instead, the poem focuses on a natural rock pool in the ocean. Just a circle of rocks right off the beach where the tide comes in.
Think about the physics of an ocean rock pool compared to the lap pool. The lap pool is a sterile environment designed to eliminate all variables so you can measure pure, isolated human exertion.
But the rock pool is chaotic.
Very chaotic. The water level changes with the tide, the currents pull at you, the temperature shifts. Yet Manuel writes that jumping into that natural pool felt like flying. He and his brother would dive in backwards, keeping an eye out for each other.
He writes that they wore their black competition swim trunks, which is such a great detail. They bring the uniform of their structured world into the wild, but in the ocean, they leave their fears on the rocks. They trade the anxiety of the stopwatch for the pure, unstructured joy of splashing each other.
Finding harmony with the current.
Yes, they find harmony with the shifting, unpredictable current under the blue skies.
And the psychological result of that shift is vital. He notes that after swimming in the ocean, when they went to school, they weren't exhausted, they were energized. They were ready for their classes, ready for the next rigid competition.
The ocean taught them something the pool couldn't.
He makes the explicit point that the tranquil school pool could never teach them what the chaotic rock pool taught them. The ocean taught them embodiment. It taught them how to sync their internal rhythm with an external, uncontrollable force.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he applies the same lens of embodiment to team sports. And I found this section of the source material genuinely surprising.
Oh, the sports poetry is fascinating.
Right. When you look at contact, sports, rugby, basketball, soccer, the defining characteristic is usually aggression. It's two opposing forces trying to dominate each other physically. It's territorial warfare on grass or hardwood. But Manuel completely strips the violence out of his description of these games.
He really does. He describes sports not as battles, but as intricate gyrations. He views the athletes as executing a set of geometric moves. He writes about the transition from circles to parabolas.
Circles to parabolas.
Yeah, suggesting that the movement of the human body in play mimics the fundamental geometric structures that bind the universe together.
Yeah.
He says there is no body movement without flow, getting ready for the dance of life with all the twists and turns a body is capable of making.
I have to admit, calling a rugby scrum a parabola or a cosmic dance is a very poetic way to describe 200-pound guys smashing into each other in the mud.
It is.
But I see what he's doing. He specifically focuses on the mechanics, the running, tripping, and falling on the grass in rugby, the jumping and colliding in basketball, the kicking in soccer. He argues that pure competition isn't about hurting the other guy. It's a conduit that allows energy to run from one player to another.
It is a profound reimagining of physical conflict. He offers this beautiful, almost metaphysical image. The extremities of the body, the arms, the legs, they define the physical edges of the player, but the heart and mind encapsulate the energy of the heavens.
The game is just an excuse to share that energy.
Exactly. And we see this theme of shared physical energy and trust reach its peak in a poem about a motorbike ride.
Oh, this poem is incredibly evocative. He describes cruising down the road on a motorbike, and the imperative, the central command of the poem, is directed at the passenger behind him. He says, "Hold on to me. Don't be afraid to hold on."
Yeah.
He promises that they will not fall if they just hold on to each other against what he calls the headwinds of fate and future.
If you've ever ridden on the back of a motorcycle, you know exactly what he means. You're entirely exposed to the elements. The wind is physically trying to push you off the machine.
It's terrifying.
It can be. The only way to survive, the only way to find flow in that scenario is complete physical trust in the person steering and leaning with them into the curves. The flow isn't about avoiding the headwind. The headwind is inevitable. The flow is the human connection that allows you to cut through it together.
Connection as the ultimate survival tool against fate. It's a really beautiful thought. But if connection and shared energy are the essence of flow, then a true deep dive demands that we look at the inverse.
Right. What happens when it stops?
Exactly. What happens when the connection is severed? What happens when the current violently stops?
This is where the Omnibus takes a decidedly dark, deeply analytical turn. Manuel is far too experienced in the law and in life to be a blind optimist. He knows that flow is fragile.
It can be broken.
He knows it can be blocked, dammed up, or destroyed entirely. And the consequences of that rupture are catastrophic.
There's one poem in particular that I had to read 3 times because it was just so heavy. It's a poem about a father and a young son. And the dynamic is brutal. The father is constantly yelling at the boy. He's relentlessly impatient. Nothing the kid does is ever good enough.
Manuel uses the explicit phrase, "There was no flow between father and son."
The connection is totally blocked, so the child does what any kid would do in a hostile environment. He retreats, he withdraws into video games, he becomes a math prodigy, he lives entirely inside his own head, inside his imagination, because the real world with his father is intolerable.
Their only interaction is an occasional hollow video call.
And then the ultimate rupture occurs. The boy is 9 years old. He hears his mother crying hysterically in the other room. She can't reach the father. The boy, perhaps trying to fix the situation, tries to initiate one of their video calls. But there is no answer. The father has committed suicide.
The psychological fallout described in the poem is devastating. Manuel writes that from that moment on, the boy was stuck in his emotions. The dam didn't just block his relationship with his father. It blocked his relationship with himself. He couldn't even look at photographs of himself as a young child. He suppresses the trauma entirely. He shoves it down into the deepest part of his psyche.
But here is where the poem takes a fascinating turn. Eventually, as he grows up, he channels all of that suppressed, pressurized emotion. He abandons math, and he chooses to become an actor.
And not just any actor.
Right. He becomes renowned as one of the most sensitive, emotionally powerful actors of his generation. He uses the trauma to fuel his art.
But there is a massive caveat to his success. He has one unbreakable rule in his career. He categorically refuses to accept any script where the protagonist's father is required to die.
Okay, wait. Stop right there, because I have a major question about this. We've been talking about flow as a mechanism for survival. Is this actor actually experiencing flow, or is he just surviving a flood?
That's a great distinction.
Because he is using his trauma to create incredible art, yes. But the fact that he absolutely refuses to engage with a script where a father dies tells me he hasn't healed.
No, he hasn't.
The core trauma is still a massive, impenetrable concrete dam in his mind. He's just diverted the water around it. Is forced expression born from unhealed trauma actually flow?
That is a phenomenal question, and it cuts to the core of psychological theory regarding trauma and art. If we connect this to the bigger picture, I would argue, and I think a close reading of Manuel's text supports this, that the actor's situation is a compromised flow.
Compromise.
Yes, you are absolutely right. The original riverbed is completely blocked. The trauma of the suicide is a permanent dam. What the actor has done is desperately carve a spillway. The art is the spillway.
It keeps him from drowning.
Exactly. It prevents him from drowning entirely, but it is a violent, pressurized release, not a natural current. Manuel is showing us that when natural flow is denied by abuse or trauma, the human spirit will eventually force the energy out somewhere else, but it leaves deep, permanent scars.
The energy has to go somewhere. If you don't let it flow naturally, it will blast a hole in the wall. And Manuel explicitly catalogs all the other ways flow can be destroyed in another poem. He literally writes a list of conditions where flow cannot exist.
It's a stark, uncompromising list.
Yeah.
He writes, there is no flow when there is pain in your body. There is no flow when your heart is broken. There is no flow when your spirit is lost.
Yeah.
There is no flow when your soul is adrift.
He goes even further. He says there is no flow when your eyes are filled with tears, when you suppress what you love. He explicitly targets modern society, saying flow is lost in the alienation of modernity.
Yes.
He points out the biological betrayals. There is no flow when illness strips away your eloquence, when cancer consumes what is good, when frailty overtakes you. And he ends it with the ultimate finality. There is no flow when you are gone.
This is exactly why I said earlier that his concept of flow is not a commercial wellness trend. You cannot just breathe through terminal cancer. You cannot mindfulness your way out of a shattered heart. He acknowledges the brutal material reality of human suffering. Pain, disease, and death are absolute ruptures of the current.
But he doesn't just limit this idea of rupture to the physical body. He extends it to the institutional body. Think back to our listener who might be working in a massive corporation or a rigid academic environment right now. Manuel writes a scathing critique of institutional bureaucracy, specifically focusing on academic retirement.
Having spent decades as a professor and a judge, Manuel was intimately familiar with how institutions treat human capital.
Well, I'm sure.
He writes about the moment a university or college decides to close its doors to a faculty member, branding it with a polite term, retirement. He says there is no more flow of the contributions that flowed from the professor to his or her students.
He describes it not as a celebration, but as an abrupt, violent severing. A teaching contract is terminated without a single meaningful word, just bureaucratic silence. He writes, in that silence, there is a finality that mirrors death.
That's a heavy line.
It is. Think about that. You spend 40 years pouring your knowledge, your energy, your passion into generations of students. You are a literal river of wisdom. And then, because a fiscal calendar turns over, an administrator pulls a lever and the dam comes down. The connection is severed. You are offered a hollow letter of congratulations or a standard retirement stipend, but the energy transfer is dead.
Bureaucracies are inherently terrified of organic flow. Flow is unpredictable. Bureaucracy demands predictability.
It wants to control everything.
Exactly. A bureaucratic system seeks to categorize, quantify, and control.
Sure.
It wants to start and stop human contribution on a fiscal schedule. But the transmission of knowledge, true mentorship, the love of a subject that doesn't operate on a fiscal quarter.
Right.
When an institution arbitrarily dams that river with forced retirement, it doesn't just harm the professor, it starves the students downstream who would have drank from that water.
But Manuel, ever the strategist, doesn't end the poem in despair. He notes that the system might build a dam, but the water still exists.
The water finds a way.
Right. He writes that life goes on, and what was once taught can find a welcomed home in new hearts outside the academy. He says this reality shatters the myth that knowledge is solely the property of institutions of higher learning. The university might own the classroom, but they don't own the flow. The teacher will just find a new riverbed.
The river always finds a way. But this raises an urgent practical question for anyone listening. If we accept that flow can be violently blocked by trauma, by illness, by the cold machinery of modern institutions, how do we actively reclaim it?
Yes, what do we do?
When we find ourselves standing in front of a dam, what tools do we use to restart the current?
And this is where the deep dive gets into the truly fascinating, almost mystical territory of Manuel's worldview. because his poetry suggests that when logic, law, and structure fail us, the only way to reclaim our flow is through a radical reliance on presence, intuition, and sometimes a healthy dose of mysticism.
To illustrate this, we really have to examine the poem about the shaman in Chiang Rai. This piece is a masterclass in synthesis, and it perfectly encapsulates his view on healing.
Set the scene for us.
The poem drops us into a remote village in the hills of Thailand. There is a healing ceremony taking place for a child who had almost drowned. The local shaman is conducting the ritual. He's repeating ancient incantations. He's using holy water. It is a deeply spiritual, folk magic setting.
But right alongside the shaman, in the exact same room, there is a medical doctor prescribing Western pharmaceuticals for the child.
Yeah.
Manuel notes this beautiful detail. He says, "This mixture of folk and Western medicine was not unusual in the hills of Chiang Rai." I love that. There is no ideological war happening in this room. The doctor isn't rolling his eyes at the shaman, and the shaman isn't rejecting the pills.
They understand that healing a ruptured flow requires attacking the problem from both the physical and the spiritual dimensions simultaneously.
But the true revelation of the poem happens on the periphery of the room. There is a volunteer teacher watching the ceremony. The shaman finishes with the child, turns, and approaches the teacher. He asks to read the teacher's palms. After examining his hands, the shaman tells the teacher that he is highly complicated to read. He says the teacher's palms are simultaneously hot and cold, as if they contain two competing souls. Recognizing this deep internal fracture, the shaman instructs the parents to share the healing holy water with the teacher as well.
And here is the twist that makes the hair on my arms stand up. The poem then reveals a secret that absolutely nobody in that village knew.
What was it?
The teacher had secretly survived a massive medical trauma. He had undergone surgery for a brain tumor, a surgery that, had it been delayed even slightly, would have killed him. He's out in this remote village volunteering as a way to earn spiritual merit, to somehow pay back the universe for the fact that he survived when he probably shouldn't have.
The shamanic reading represents flow as the passage between worlds. The teacher is trapped in a liminal space. He is physically alive thanks to Western surgery, but spiritually he is torn between the hot and cold of survival and mortality.
He's suffering from profound survivor's guilt.
Exactly. The Western doctors fixed the physical tumor, but they couldn't fix the spiritual rupture. The shaman, relying purely on intuition, senses the blockage. He sees the competing souls and offers a spiritual remedy to complement the physical survival.
It highlights the absolute necessity of intuition. Sometimes you cannot logic your way out of trauma. You have to trust a deeper energetic resonance. And speaking of intuition versus logic, we have to talk about the 6 rectangular neon red doors.
Oh, this is, without a doubt, the most vivid cinematic imagery in the entire omnibus. I want every listener to picture this scenario in their mind right now.
It reads like a psychological thriller. The poem places you, the reader, standing in front of a wall. Built into the wall are 6 rectangular doors. They are identical, exact same size, exact same shape.
Okay.
Each door is illuminated by glaring red neon lights, and stamped on every single one of them is the word danger.
Manuel writes, "It is for you to discover their connection, to choose one over all the others. When they're all identical, this appears impossible." Think about how often we find ourselves in this exact scenario in life.
All the time.
You are faced with a major career change, a difficult medical decision, a complex relationship crossroads. You have multiple options in front of you. And when you analyze them, they all look equally terrifying. They all carry immense risk. They all flash danger in red neon.
And what is our default modern reaction to that scenario? We pull out a spreadsheet, we try to use logic, data, and mental analysis to deduce which dangerous door is marginally less dangerous than the others. We try to outsmart the risk.
But Manuel argues that mental analysis will completely fail you in the most critical moments of your life.
He explicitly writes that when the doors are identical, logic is useless. The only tool you have left is your own individual flow.
He says it's your individual flow that makes one door energetically more or less attractive than others. It's your gut instinct. It's the physical pull in your stomach. It's the hair standing up on the back of your neck. You have to abandon the spreadsheet and trust your unique energetic signature to guide you toward the right door.
But he doesn't promise safety. This is crucial. He doesn't say, trust your gut and you will find the safe door. He writes, regardless of which door you choose, there will always be danger and the possibility of triumph, which is never foreclosed so long as you try.
Destiny isn't about sitting back and surrendering to fate. It emerges through our active, terrified participation. You have to accept the danger, trust your energetic pull, grab the handle, and walk through the door.
If you stand in the hallway forever trying to calculate the odds, your flow dies right there.
Exactly.
He reinforces this vital concept of participation and presence in his philosophy of photography. In another deeply contemplative poem, he describes a photographer standing in a mountain cabin on a Sunday morning. The photographer is looking out the window, watching the clouds, the landscape, and the sunlight. But Manuel completely subverts our expectation of what makes a photograph meaningful.
Right, because usually photography is all about finding the light. But Manuel says no, it's not about the light. It's about the shadows. He argues that the shadows are what give an image substance, content, and depth. A picture of pure light is just a blinding whiteout. You need the darkness to define the edges of reality.
And then he turns the camera inward. He observes that the photographer's goal is to freeze the action of a fleeting moment, to capture time. But the profound realization of the poem is that the photographer cannot freeze the world. He is the one who is frozen.
Frozen in what way?
He is frozen within the constraints of his own camera frame, his own physical location, his own mortality. He has to freeze his own emotional biases just long enough to accurately witness the truth of the light and the darkness.
It's an admission of our own limitations. We cannot capture the flow of life and hold it forever in a photograph or a memory. The river keeps moving. The absolute best we can do is be completely present in the singular moment of witnessing it. Which leads Manuel to make what I think is the most important distinction in the entire book. He writes, "Intensity is not flow, nor fulfillment."
That line is an indictment of modern hustle culture. We live in a society that worships intensity. The relentless grind, the dramatic highs, the crushing lows. We mistake cortisol and exhaustion for importance. We think if we aren't sweating and stressing, we aren't moving forward.
But Manuel, the man who fought the Ivy League and the federal courts, tells us that flow ultimately requires nothing more than presence. He says there's no need for grand, dramatic moves all the time.
Oh.
Tending to a garden is flow. Sharing a quiet cup of tea or coffee with someone is flow. Taking a stroll in the park, watching a sunrise, or sitting in a chair looking through old photo albums. He explicitly advises the reader to substitute the illusion of happiness for the reality of peace.
The illusion of happiness is that constant, exhausting pursuit of the next intense high. The reality of peace is being fully present in the current moment, even if it's quiet. However, we shouldn't confuse presence with boredom, because being deeply present in the moment can also yield incredibly vibrant electric experiences.
Which brings us to the fashion poem. If tending a garden is the quiet side of presence, this poem is the loud, vibrant side. He shifts from quiet mountain cabins to the explosive energy of haute couture. He describes an African prince sitting by the runway. The prince is wearing a red turban and a draping Spanish black cape fastened with an ornate buckle. He's watching the fashion shows in New York, Paris, London, Milan.
Manuel paints the scene with intensely saturated colors, purples, saffrons, terracotta, fuchsia, taupe, olive green. He captures the designers who live entirely for elegance and the fleeting gesture of a model walking the runway.
And the climax of the poem isn't a grand philosophical statement. It's a frantic moment of creation. He describes a designer overwhelmed by the nonstop action and inspiration of the room, pulling out a pen and furiously sketching a new design on a cocktail napkin.
He writes, "The imagination waits for no one, appearing in the moments that surge like an elixir, which, if not taken in the instant, disappears."
That is the essence of staying present. You have to be so attuned to the current moment that when the flow of inspiration surges, even if it's midnight in a crowded New York club and all you have is a napkin, you catch it. If you are distracted, if you are lost in the past or anxious about the future, the elixir disappears and the idea is gone forever.
It is a breathtakingly comprehensive philosophy. Think about the incredible diversity of images we've unpacked today. We started with a teenager securing Ford Foundation grants. We moved to the roaring basement boilers of the Douglas projects, a mother sweating across Central Park, the geometry of a rugby tackle, the crushing trauma of a father's suicide, the bureaucratic silence of academic retirement, a shaman reading palms in Thailand, 6 terrifying red doors, the shadows in a mountain photograph, and a sketch on a cocktail napkin.
So what does this all mean for the listener? How do you take the life and the poetry of Manuel del Valle Colón and actually apply it to your Tuesday morning commute?
It requires a fundamental shift in how you interact with the world around you. Manuel's life proves that being truly effective, whether you are fighting for civil rights or just trying to navigate your own family dynamics, isn't just about intellect or brute force.
Yeah, force isn't enough.
Yes, He wielded legal statutes and Ivy League degrees like weapons. But his true power lay in his ability to read the unseen currents. It's about reading the palms of the people around you and understanding their hidden traumas. It's about looking at a photograph and valuing the shadows as much as the light. It's about standing in a concrete city that feels designed to crush you and finding the beating heart in the basement.
It's the realization that flow is not a passive vacation from reality. You don't just put your feet up and float down the river asleep. Flow is an aggressive, daily, active choice to participate in the messy reality of your own destiny. It's the choice that a mother with no money makes to walk miles for art. It's the choice a 17-year-old makes to look at an elite institution and say, I'm going to rewire this. It's the choice to question every assumption handed to you.
And perhaps most importantly, it is the choice to hold on tightly to the people you love when the headwinds of fate are actively trying to blow you off the motorcycle. Flow is human connection. When that connection is nurtured, you generate the energy required to alter the landscape of the world. When that connection is severed, the water stops, the trauma builds, and the soul becomes adrift.
We started this deep dive talking about architecture. We talked about the rigid, unyielding lines of a city grid. We look at the massive institutions in our lives, the government, the corporate ladder, the legal system, and we think they are made of solid rock. We think they are permanent.
But Manuel del Valle Colón's entire existence was a testament to the fact that nothing is solid rock. The brick walls of the public housing projects, the stone arches of Yale, the entrenched legal precedents of the federal courts, they are all permeable. They all have microscopic fissures. They can all be navigated, altered, and completely transcended if you understand how to direct your energy.
The water always wins. The flow always finds a way. And that brings us to our final thought for you to carry into your day. Forget about Manuel for a second and think about your own life. Think about those 6 identical neon red doors. You have them. We all do. You are likely standing in front of a massive choice right now, staring at doors that all scream danger. You've probably been standing in the hallway for weeks, looking at spreadsheets, trying to logically deduce which door is the safest, which path guarantees no pain.
But if this deep dive has taught us anything, it's that logic won't save you in the hallway. The doors are identical. The danger is guaranteed on all sides.
The only thing that can guide you now is your unique, inexplicable, energetic flow. So the question you need to ask yourself today isn't which door is the right one. The question is, what is your gut violently pulling you toward, and are you finally brave enough to grab the handle and turn it?